So today's webinar is about tackling wicked problems, or how to nail jelly to the wall. And the learning outcomes I hope to generally be to learn how to nail jelly to the wall and develop an understanding about the wickedness of problems, and perhaps rather the second. And starting with specifically to understand what are wicked problems, to look in linear cause and effect logic and why it won't be sufficient to tackle a wicked problem, to look at two concrete examples of wicked problems, and then afterwards to focus on how to work with wicked problems, and to learn a bit about available methods and techniques to research and potentially resolve wicked problems. And at the end, we will have a short reflective group activity session on where we will look into one of the examples that we earlier discussed and how that could be taken forward into a research. Now, first of all, what are wicked problems? Now, wicked problems are something that are difficult to define, and the reason for that is that different stakeholders have different versions of what the problem is, and no of those versions is complete verifiable right or wrong, and it's evolving and continuously changing situations. And there are no clear solutions to the problem or to the parts of the problem. And any of the proxy solutions are not exactly verifiable right or wrong, but rather better or worse or good enough. And there are many independencies and multiple causes and internally conflicting goals, partly because of the different stakeholders and the different views that the stakeholders have at different points in the time. And wicked problems are rather socially complex than technically complex. And they cannot be treated with traditional, linear, and analytical approaches only, and require holistic rather than linear thinking. And we will look into that and try to illustrate how that can look like. Now, let's start with a tiny traditional problem, which is a tame problem, and contrast that with a wicked problem. In the case of the tame problem, there are clear definitions of the problem, and that also unveils the solution on how it can be resolved or fixed. While on a wicked problem, there's no agreement about what the problem is, and each attempt to create a solution changes the problem itself. Even we interacting with the problem are changing the problem as it is. So this is also showing that the role of the stakeholder is very different. In the tame problem, the problem does not change over time, and the causes of a problem are determined primarily by experts using scientific data, while in the wicked problem case, the problem changes all of the time, and many stakeholders have different ideas about what the real problem is and what the causes are, or for the parts of the problem. And there's a stopping rule, which is that in the tame problem case, the task is completed when the problem is solved, while a wicked problem can't be solved, therefore it can't be stopped, it just evolves further. So the nature of the problem is that—
Hi, Andreas.
Yes.
Sorry. Could you please either you zoom in or use the slideshow so we can actually see what's written now, if that's okay. It's not very legible for me.
Okay, I unfortunately can't zoom in, but in the next slides, we will have bigger versions of that. So this is a very old scan, therefore the quality is not that great. Apologies for that. But then let me move into the next slide, where we will have a much bigger. So this is saying the same thing, but using illustrations. Now, wicked problems are messy. So everything where humans are involved potentially is a wicked problem. And this is because there are different views of the problem that are often contradictory, and there are interconnections that are often invisible, and there are often conflicts about the value that need to be negotiated. So it's not set in stone, there's no clear cause and effect relationship, it's all evolving. And often data is not really supportive, or at least it's incomplete, and therefore it cannot entirely guide us in our analytics. So I think the biggest getting out of this slide is wicked problems are messy, and everywhere where humans are involved, potentially a wicked problem can hide. Often, once your research gets stuck on a very obvious point, Like we talked initially here about fluctuation rates, like you can observe a high fluctuation rate in the organization. It's clearly broke, it's not meant as it is, and that's going on for 5 years. Now, quite obviously, if it's going on for 5 years and it's clearly understood, there's something wicked in there, something that prevents the situation from being resolved. Perhaps conflicting policies, power fights, whatever it is, but just the sheer time frame of 5 years, this problem being existing and everyone in the organization understands it's there. It's so much an indicator of this is wicked. Now, and while this is a clear indicator for that case of fluctuation rate, there are different shades of weakness, and as said, that can change over time. If you look, for example, into unemployment rates at national levels, usually that's understood as being a clear problem. However, it's not. Unemployment rates might be high, yet if there are good stimulus packages being furnished into the economy, well, this will create employment, it will create revenues, so this would be perceived well. So this shows, okay, at this point in time, unemployment is not perceived so drastically. Contrary to that, once the economy runs out of money and social unrests would start to arise and people get killed. Now, this is the very same situation. Unemployment rates are high, but the problem will be appearing very differently. So understand there are different shades of weakness and they should be looked into at this point in time where you are, and perhaps also historically on how the problem has evolved as long as you have been following it. And if you look in this type of matrix, as better as you can picture out the problem, as better it can be understood. So there are different shades of weakness. And there's also different understanding of what wicked problems are and how to work with them. Now, if you're new to wicked problems, then you start rather from the left side here of this evolution of wicked problems, and you would work your way perhaps through that list to understand how the wicked problem has been come along. Now, as you make your way through it and as you build up a better understanding about the weakness of the problem, as more you will look into different things, like in the middle here, perhaps on governance challenges, like what are the multiple stakeholders, what are the frames and their values, because you already understood very well who are the stakeholders. So, and if you understand who are the stakeholders, you will understand where perhaps there is a lack of shared or holistic understanding of the problem. Let's go back to the unemployment case. Like, unemployment is there, it is high, but there's a big stimulus package. Now, everyone understands that those ones that are running enterprises because they get those stimuli, and those ones that are looking for jobs because they quickly get into jobs, even though they might not be sustainable or long lasting. So, but in this situation, there's a shared understanding about there is a stimulus package in the economy, so that will help and benefit all of us. So the problem is there, it's unemployment exists for various reasons, but just because of the stimulus package, the economy is boosted, and that is guiding everyone who's participating at that point in time in the economy into one direction and provides a shared view. So as the problem understanding then evolves further and manifests, there might again become different ways of working with the problem. And then you look into sort of governance solutions. You start off cooperation, collective learning. So as more the problem is understood, as more advanced you're in it, as more you're over time working in it, as different are the means of working with a big problem. So at this point in time where you are, it will likely be more on the left side. Having said that, if this is a situation that you observe as part of your work environment for a number of years, you very quickly could move from the left to the right side just by writing up the knowledge that you are holding already, because you are exposed to that problem each day. So all that you need to be done is thinking through it more strategically. And I said a lot of time, once your research gets stuck, like, why is it getting stuck? This is here rather obviously broken. That should be fixable, but it's not for quite some years. So write it down, think it through, and see if there's not a big problem hiding somewhere, like company politics or else. Now, let's look into why cause and effect logic is only of limited use once tackling wicked problems. And I think here the word of importance is limited. It's not useless, but it's of limited use. And it's of complementary use. Now, if we look into the typology of problems, then perhaps we can understand they are tame, complex, and wicked ones. Now, if you look here at the right side down, as more as you go to the right side, as more messy it becomes, as more unclear it becomes. You might have uncertain estimable sequences, you might have unknown emergent sequences, and you might have unknown causes. So as more as you go to the right side down, as more complex and unclear it comes, and as more problematic it will be to work over linear cause and effect relations only. If we use a linear approach, then we have a problem, we have causes, we see effects, there is a sequence, we collect data alongside that, and we can analyze all of that. And then we can come up with either a solution, or we can understand there is perhaps no solution. No solution? Yes, can well be. The organization expects 25% revenue rate for sustainable growth. Now put that two sentences, or the two factors together, 25% and sustainable growth. Not possible. So once we have analyzed that, we understand that, and we can say, okay, there's no solution, we go away. But we have a clear understanding that we derived on based upon cause and effects analytics. Now, the beauty is, if we move into the wicked problem scenario, that we will have exactly both things sitting next to each other. Let's say we have the 25% expectable revenue rate with sustainable growth sitting next to each other. It's still on the right side. We can still analyze that situation. Now, the question then perhaps rather is, why the heck is someone considering really it to be possible to have 25% revenue rates and sustainable growth? Why is it? Is it the stakeholders that have a total out of mind view? Or is it just the financial investor A behind that actually doesn't care about sustainable growth and just wants short-term profit maximization, and therefore squeezes in a policy, a tiny policy that is covered into the nicely sustainability strategy that is sold to the remaining part of the investors? Now, all of those things are then to be looked at. And then we are here at the left side in combination with the right side. So we need to do both together. The right side can be very clearly worked out, and perhaps even over the books, related studies that show it's not possible to have 25% revenues and sustainable growth, or at least not for this type of business that you are in. Or if you want to have 25%, then sustainable growth would imply B. So there you can perhaps work over the books, while over the left side, you need to work more over the intangibles. You need to engage into conversations with the different stakeholders and to slowly work out what's going on here. Now, the beauty is you can picture it out like that in both of the ways, and we will show how it can look on the left side, but on the right side, that's rather by the book, and on the left side, that can be worked out as we will be looking into. Does it make sense to this point in time? Okay, we can come into it later.
Yeah.
Let's look into two tiny examples of a wicked problem. The first is rather a school book case, literally speaking.
Sorry, Andreas.
Yes, please.
Just to make sure I understand you, when we talk about a wicked problem, we're talking about a problem that it's multifaceted. It's not very clear in terms of the cause and effect. It could stem from different areas, and when you think about it, it has many areas of impact, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and this is everything that we see here on the left side. Having said that, there might be parts of the problem that will be exactly linear and straightforward rather. And this is often where you are stuck in your research or in your action on a day-to-day basis, because you see those quite obvious parts and wonder, why isn't that getting resolved if it's so obvious? And the reason is you only look at the right side and totally miss out the left side here, all of the wicked part.
Right, okay.
So let's look. Welcome. Look into examples. So there's a school case which goes as school canteens do no longer offer unhealthy foods. So that's good meant. But as a consequence, children no longer buy their lunch at school canteens, but instead they miss lunch. They save their money. They buy junk food at the shops nearby on the way home from school. And as an outcome, some children may not even eat more unhealthy. And thus, all interconnections and social complexities need to be identified, discussed, and addressed as part of a coordinated strategy for this not happening. And we will look into that later, which type of analytics and which type of reasoning will lead to the fact that the decision is taken that school canteens no longer offer unhealthy foods, which quite obviously will fire backwards and will lead to unintended consequences, and that tend to occur in such quite obvious situations where the problem is only artificially tamed. That is, it has been too narrowly addressed, and the multiple causes and interconnections are not fully exploited in the first hand before measuring and messing around with this situation.
Yes, sir, just a question, sir.
Yes, please.
I want us to look at the case again. Is it that the school canteen no longer offers healthy food, or they no longer offer unhealthy food? Because no longer offering unhealthy food means they are offering healthy food. But I thought it would be school canteen no longer offers healthy foods.
No, it's now offering healthy food. So it's no longer offering unhealthy foods. And that decision has been taken, and it backfires. And we will see later on how this can easily be avoided, what could be done to do that. Now, a second example. In this case, there's a research organization that is struggling to attract research funding. So, but the leadership team wants to push the staff to write more research funding proposals to generate more revenues. So the staff are not motivated to spend time on writing research funding proposals. They prefer to use the time to do research instead. Now, two from the senior scientific leadership team are skilled in writing research funding proposals. However, they only care about their own departments, and they do not help to build up the capacity in the organization. Moreover, rather contrary to that, they consume any resources in their organizations they can get their hand on. The human resource department assumes that researchers are highly skilled at the same time, and therefore they don't provide any training to the scientists on how to write research proposals. The business development department fails to see that quality standards of funding proposals are too low. Those that submit the proposals are aware of the low quality, but they anyway submit low quality proposals because that still ticks the boxes for the KPI. Like, you are expected to submit 3 funding proposals per year. Yeah, I write 3 funding proposals, but they are of low quality. Yeah, but KPI don't consider that. I get away with that. And even worse, by only communicating through email and meetings, the organization does not build up organizational knowledge and memory. Therefore, little of the value that is created is captured. And nothing of that's quite obvious that's happening in the organization is obvious to others because of the knowledge management system being absent. Now, this is an example, and it's a concrete example of a research organization where I've been working at, and it was quite obvious what was happening there. Now, while it also is a very obvious case, it can be looked at from so many different lenses. It could be looked from a behavioral or leadership issue. Why is the leadership wanting to push that? It could be looked at from a background of staffing and strategy. Why is staff not motivated? It could be looked at from a behavioral and management issue perspective. Why some people do not help to build up capacity? And if we would look at human resource department, assuming the researchers are well skilled, now why are they assuming that? Do they lack knowledge? Do they lack ability? Is it a strategy issue? Is it a behavioral issue? Is it a leadership issue? Is it a communication issue? And if the business development department fails to see that quality standards are too low and that people get away with just submitting 3 low quality proposals per year, Why is it? Again, is it a question of knowledge, of ability, of staffing, of strategy, of behavioral and leadership issue? And if the organization does not manage to build up organizational knowledge and memory, is it again a strategy, a management, a leadership? You see, I used coloring, and depending on what we are looking at, if we look at it from a leadership background, we perhaps would look all of the things that come with leadership issues that are here in green. If we look at it from a behavioral background, we would look at the yellow parts. Now, if we look at it from a leadership wants to push staff background, then we need to connect yellow and green. So all of that can be worked out and put next to each other. Yes, Josef, please come in. You raised your hand. Is there no question at this point? No? Okay. So, but you see, depending on where you anchor the problem and what is the background that you give it, the research can be taken in a number of different ways. And perhaps you need to map it first out to clearly understand the nature of that wicked problem, and then to see where are the entry routes to approach it. Now, what then are the means to work with wicked problems? Let's look into some basic considerations first. The first thing is there's no quick fix or safe method, and that's very important for you to understand. Those ones that engage into a wicked problem, those ones that take initiatives, are those ones to be blamed if things go wrong, likely you. So, having said that, if you want to engage on a wicked problem, it likely needs to be done in a collaborative manner. And you need to work towards getting the boundaries just right over time. And there is a risk of tackling just a sub-problem rather than the wicked problem, and changes to the sub-problem will have unclear consequences to the rest of the problem. So this also needs to be understood. And if you want to learn more about that, this comprehensive guide from the Australian government can provide you with further information. So collaborative approaches are crucial. Stakeholder engagement is crucial at one point in time, and you need to understand at which point you are. Do you want to engage with the stakeholders to look back, like why is it happening for 5 years and we haven't solved it? Do you want to look into it as it understood is today? Like what are we currently battling with? And then you locate it in the historic context. Or do you want to look forward? Like why will it likely continue to exist? So this is very important to understand where are you in the process and why do you want to engage the stakeholders? And on what do you want to engage the stakeholders? Now, the question is, what is the thinking lens that you are wearing? Is it an outcome expectation based lens? And the questions are exactly geared like that. In this example, it's a build versus buy discussion, and the fact there's a new system that need to be bought in budget that was moved over time with an argument in favor of buying new systems. So then the discussion goes, what should we do? Should we buy a new system? Should we build a new system? Should we lease a system? So this is obviously one way we could do the argument and follow the argument. But we might also follow a different way of thinking and have a different lens, which works over criteria-based questions that will allow us to identify the clear issues and then to resolve them. Like the initial cost must be in the budget, is in criteria. So what can we get within that budget? How far can that budget get us? What are the budget limitations in here? Or the time to roll out. Yes, we could buy a new system, but we only have 12 months until we need to use it. So what can we get within 12 months? Or what are the internal specifications, the crucial requirements that must be met? And can any of the systems that we can buy from the shelf get us there? Or does that immediately mean we need to develop our own system? Or does it mean we will need to consider either developing a new system or using an open source system that can be customized? So this is a way of criteria-based thinking that will put us down an entire different way of thinking than working over outcome expectations, and we will use exactly this criteria-based versus outcome-based thinking once using into the healthy school lunch case. Now, likely the outcome-based expectations as to what has driven the people in the case of just taking the decision of no longer offering unhealthy food. It's a bold decision, and it's thought that that will fix it. Now, if we would have used a criteria-based reasoning and actioning based upon that, then perhaps we would have first checked what food is being served at the canteen. Then we would have perhaps identified the meals that are seen to be less healthy. Then we would have located the ingredients that are seen to be less healthy in that less healthy meals. Then we would have sought out alternative and healthier ingredients, like, for example, French fries are loved because they are crunchy and fatty. Now, which other ingredients would provide the same chewing experience or a similar one? Could it be a crunchy salad combined with crisps and then just adding, instead of saturated fat, some olive oil on that? So all of those things could then be looked into, and parents and kids could be engaged with, like, try that salad with that crunch. How does it taste? And based upon that, we could change the weekly menu and collect regular stakeholder satisfaction feedback and adapt the menu further as appropriate. So a criteria-based reasoning would drive us down an entire different way and potentially more successful way. Now, how do we engage stakeholders on criteria-based reasoning within such complex situation? Now, visualization, as it turned out, is a very powerful approach on engaging with stakeholders. Now, this type of visualization likely would require you to contract someone who really knows how to sketch, unless you're a very talented sketcher yourself. What would do the job, literally speaking, would be to work with some more rudimentary tools, such as Post-its, and then perhaps some whiteboards or your just white wall, where you can work out relationships and gradually sketch out and build up a shared vision on what the problem really is being made of. But having said all of that, and I think this is very critical, understand what things, once things go wrong, then you are the one who will be blamed, which, if you carry out research in your work environment, obviously can impact negatively your employment situation. So please do understand, be sensible on whatever you are doing, and anticipate the consequences and possible actions that might be there and what the mitigation strategies are. And yes, remaining inactive is a real option. Like, you understand everything, you mapped it out for yourself, and you see, oh no, that's not going down a good way. So by times, it's better and more advisable to remain inactive as to do something that is just apparently too risky. Are there any questions till this point in time before we come into methods and techniques? Okay, let's look into methods and techniques to research and potentially resolve wicked problems. Now, this is a four-step mess mapping approach. So visualization apparently is really useful. Also, this approach suggests mapping as a way forward. This can be followed. And as part of the mapping, we might want to use software. There are free available software solutions. The left one was used at the institute where I took my doctorate, which worked out quite well at that point in time. It's not any longer maintained. On the right side down, you see the CMAP tool from IHMC, which is from a US-based university. It's free of use, free of charge to be used. So you can give it a try to download it. If you want to do it digitally, but understand Post-its are a great alternative too. All you need is a bit of a whiteboard or some free wall, and then you put a paper on the background so you can sketch on it and put the Post-its on top. Now, if you want to work that out rather slower, then you're also invited to follow this 8-step course that we have available on tackling big problems, and where we work out all of the things rather sequential. We again start with working out a problem statement. So to start very simple, what is it that you can observe of the problem? What are the different sides? And then we gradually advance with what is happening. Do you understand what is happening here? Let's going back to the earlier case where we said high unemployment rate in the organization. It's so quite obvious. There is something broke. For 5 years, I have been observing this since I entered that organization. And no, it's not meant to be like that. We are not working here at McDonald's, but this is an automotive company. And usually at the other companies where I worked previously, that was not the case. So what is happening here? Is it a management issue? Is it power politics? Is it communication? Is it feedback loops? What are we looking exactly at? So this needs to be gradually brought out. And by bringing that out, you can move relatively quickly from the left side that you see here to the right side. You can understand what are, for example, on the right side, infrastructure and technology issues. So all of that's quite good structured and clustered. Political issues, economic issues, environmental issues, social issues. You can relate all of that. Now, if you do it in the analog way, it will take a bit if you want to remove it afterwards, but you can take pictures of it so that you have the data set sort of at hand. And you don't need to do that alone. It's a perfect mean to engage with stakeholders and to build those maps up jointly, as we will soon be seeing. Now, and as you build up your understanding of what can be looked at, you can structure it more and more. You can see like what are the different scientific disciplines to which it belongs. You, for example, could prioritize, work out gradually what are the urgencies, what is contributing to the problem more strongly or more slowly, and what are the underlying concepts that could be applied. And there are a lot of guides out that can help you in doing so, like this guide here, which is providing you with a nice matrix on how to look into that, following from basic dimensions, causal categories, more detailed dimensions, and the scale of weaknesses. So this can be slowly brought out. And looking at the scale of weakness, so who is it that defines the scale? Is it me alone? And I said the number of times stakeholder engagement is crucial. And no, it's not meant by you alone, but this is rather something where you should engage with the stakeholders, but also understanding with whom and why and with how many. So initially, perhaps you'd rather would want to pre-test and talk to colleagues that are more close by, to work colleagues with whom you have a rather friendly relationship, and then to advance on that as you go along, and to then see what are the stakeholders that should be engaged in the process and at which point in time. So there are strategies on identifying stakeholder strategies on differentiating between and categorizing stakeholders, and also investigating relationships between stakeholders. So there are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of literature on how to work with this situation. And it might not always come by the word wicked problem. If you look into complexity theory, then you will find a lot of things that are equally holding valid here. So if you talk with your potential supervisors or with the faculty, they might not have come across the word wicked problems, or they are even hostile to it because it suggests something rather modern and fancy, but they will have certainly come across chaos theory, across complexity theory. So they might know things by different names. Therefore, it's worth it to perhaps rather work over diagrams and leave those paradigms aside at that point in time, to not say, hey, look, I'm working here over wicked problems, but rather here, look, I'm working at the complex situations. And those are the stakeholders that I think need to be identified or need to be worked with, because they can help me to understand the why and how it is happening here. And I want to see, when should I engage them? Once I look at external conditions, for example, or once I look at organizational factors or individual factors, those are the things when I want to engage them. And the reason I want to engage them is because I want to look here at the value creation for society, or I want to look here at the value creation for the organization. So as more detailed as you work that out over time, as more things become clear to you and also the others being engaged, and it's easier it will be to communicate the results, the findings of your research, but also to understand interrelatedness of the different components of the problem. For example, here, this is a very advanced stage where you say, okay, I understand now that there are power issues, legitimacy issues, and urgencies that are impacting the problem greatly. And those parts here in 7 are the common parts that unite the different stakeholders. And this is where I can take them on board and work with them. Or that you say, okay, the part 5 is allowing me to work with those different types, with the power and urgency dynamics of the problem, or problem dimension of that. And as you go along, you can picture out very clearly how the problem looks like, what are the processes, and how the stakeholders interact. Now, this is a very advanced mapping of a wicked problem, and it's taken from a very stable EU-funded project that had that as a final outcome of one of the research areas. So if you want to see how this can be look like at a very advanced stage, follow the URL in the below, but understand that you are very likely starting from some slides earlier in here, from a very, very, very neat and nice graphic or mapping out of the problem. So a quick heads up as we are halfway through the 8 steps. Now I'm presenting the information very much linear. Like most information in research is presented to you in a linear way. But please do understand, research is not linear. It is presented to you in a linear way, but as a matter of fact, it's not taking place linear. You are expected also to present it linear, but it is not linear. So having said that, let's look further into that. Once you engage a stakeholder and want to understand their perceptions, there are again techniques and methods that are easily to be used to do so. And one of the beautiful videos that I found that explains it very, very good and solid on how to engage with the stakeholders around basic activities, such as the draw how to make toast activity. There are good activities that can set the scene for you to engage stakeholders to work from just drawing toast towards a rather complex situation with a no point of time. This might be an outcome of a 2 days or 3 day stakeholder engagement workshop that you might organize as part of your research in your organization or with some of the stakeholders that you invite for targeted sessions, which can be also broken down. And that will allow you to build up together a shared and common knowledge. And this shared and common knowledge then ultimately will allow you to jointly work towards observable patterns and themes. And this can allow you then to move exactly from something simple of just to draw toast to something right, which could be a scenario on understanding cost-value relations and how different things compete and relate to each other, and also to understand what is a common vocabulary and what are common ways of thinking. Let's look into that left side here, figure 5, contrasting mental models. Now, if the organizational view in your organization is that the organization is rather an obedient machine, that it must perform and function, that employees are there to deliver output X on day A, then this will obviously have a very different way of work than if there is an organization that has an adaptive system and a more adaptive mindset and a holistic mindset that's focusing on where the organization shall be, what the performance is expected to be, and therefore what are the underlying goals and how those goals are reached. Now, this is important for you to understand also, because depending on whether side you are, depending on that, the research and the stakeholder engagement in particular will be very different, and you will need to deploy a very different vocabulary if you are working in an obedient machine-based organization, or if you are in an adaptive system-based organization. And by understanding that, ahead of undertaking the research, ahead of engaging with the stakeholders, this will allow you to later on build up a shared terminology, a shared view based upon the outcomes of the stakeholder engagement and based upon the achievements and groupings that then can lead to either or any of those scenarios, from a very simple KIDS type of shared pattern and issues towards a very complex computer supported model driven scenario or view that shows different types of patterns and themes. Now, independently, whether it's more simple or more complex, what's important is that you try to understand what are the means of tackling the wicked problem and where do you want to take it, or where could it be taken. As said, a wicked problem is something that cannot be solved. It just can be mitigated, it can be tamed, or you can understand there's no way of taming it, there's no way of mitigating it. The only viable option is here to move away or to leave it untouched, and it will continue further. The organization, for example, was not going bankrupt despite having a very high unemployment rate for the past 5 years. So perhaps the next 5 years, the organization still will not go bankrupt with the same high unemployment rates. Are those desirable? No. Would it be more beneficial if the unemployment rates go down? Yes. Would the profit margin increase? Yes. Would the peace in the organization increase? Yes. But your results show not achievable. Therefore, keep it as is. So this is important for you to understand. What is the strategy ultimately? And this is something for you to do based upon the analysis of your findings, based upon the analysis of how you engage with the stakeholders, and then you can decide which type of strategy do you approach. Is there an option to resolve it? Is there an option to reduce the problem? Or is there at least something that we can adopt so to cope with the problem? Like, okay, the unemployment rate will be as high. However, there is nothing preventing us to, by the same time, try to work on a better climate in the organization due to increasing feedback loops, due to increasing communication, due to working towards having a better understanding of what is to be avoided in approaching the workforce, or due to another set of training activities. So there might be ways that allow you to cope. And while they are unlikely to immediately would reduce and result in reducing the unemployment rate, at least they would not make the situation worse. So a good understanding here can help you on how to take things further. And as said earlier, yes, remaining inactive is a real option at hand that should be considered. And this is exactly then the final step for you once you work with a wicked problem, to understand what should you do. Should you act? Should you sense? Should you respond? Or should you exactly stay inactive or just walk away? And you can think that through at the end of your research, perhaps rather with yourself than sharing it in a group, because as said, it can have consequences that are potentially severe for yourself if you are to be blamed. So rather try to think it through, and based upon that, decide how to react. Yeah. After you've engaged with the stakeholders, you will be able to locate you in any of those quadrants on the right side, or understand the type of disorder on the left side that you are dealing with. And that will also guide you on your further actions. Now, I understand we have covering a lot of areas within a time frame of a rather long 60 minutes now. And with this, we will come into a final reflection and stop this introductory webinar on how to work with big problems. If you want to have a deeper understanding, if you want to train that further, as said, take a look in this advanced training course that we have on offer, where you can work slowly through the 8 steps. That will take you certainly a while if you do it in a self-study mode. And yes, it will be a bit painful, but if you are stuck with a research problem and you sense, yeah, that well could be, it's because of I'm stuck because it's a big problem. Look into this further. That ultimately can save you a lot of time in the long term and make your research progress. So in closing, a lot of times we work with students that exactly just struggle and got stuck because they are dealing with the big problems and they haven't had a clue that this is the case. And now once it is understood, at least it allows them to progress. Even if they say, no, the big problem is not anything I want to frame my research in, I would rather take it from a totally different angle. We have had many students that did that, but still under the understanding that they had, this is a big situation, helps them to settle on a tiny sub-problem, like the high fluctuation rates that are not supposed to be there. And then they established boundaries around that, and that was perfectly fine and enough for them to work with the problem further. So with this, let me stop the recording.